HOA tried to steal my land for a resort. They never saw this coming. They thought they owned everything, every lawn, every fence, every single inch of this neighborhood. But they made one mistake. They thought my land was theirs too. So they brought their papers, their lawyers, even their fake smiles. And they tried to take it all. But what they didn't know was that I had been waiting for them. And when the trap finally snapped shut, the entire HOA collapsed in front of me. And the best part is, they never even saw it coming. Welcome back to Beyond HOA. Karen, I'm David, just a regular homeowner in a quiet suburban neighborhood. At least, it looked quiet on the outside. I live at the edge of the cul-de-sac, with a small piece of land the HOA never controlled, and that single piece of land became the battlefield for the biggest fight of my life. That single piece of land became the battlefield for the biggest fight of my life. I never asked for trouble. I never wanted to fight with anyone. I just wanted peace, a quiet home, a place where I could sit in my backyard, watch the trees move, and drink my morning coffee in silence. But peace is never what the HOA wants. Peace is boring to them. They want control. They want power. They want people to bow their heads when they walk by with their clipboards and fake smiles. At first, it was small things. A letter about my trash can being visible from the street. Another one about the paint on my fence. Then a fine about the shade of my lawn. As if I could control the sun, I laughed the first time. I thought it was a joke, but the letters kept coming, and the smiles of the board members grew sharper every time they walked past my house. You might think I'm exaggerating, but in this neighborhood, rules were religion. The HOA board was the priesthood, and the president, she was the queen. Her name was Linda. But everyone whispered another name behind her back, Karen. Linda loved to stand at the end of the cul-de-sac with her clipboard, tilting her head like a hawk. She would watch kids ride their bikes. She would measure fences with a tape. She even carried a camera to snap pictures of rule violations. It was a performance, a suburban theater of power. And somehow, she believed she owned us all. But she didn't own me, not yet, because my home sat at the very edge of the neighborhood. And behind it, there was a patch of land, not too big, not too small, but just enough. That land was mine, my name on the deed, and unlike the other homes, the HOA had no authority over it. At least, that's what I thought. One morning, I walked outside with my coffee. The air smelled fresh. The kind of morning that makes you forget how cruel people can be. But waiting in my mailbox was a letter. Not the usual fine, not the usual notice. This one had bold letters across the top, Community Expansion Project. I opened it slowly, and with each line, my hands started to shake. The HOA wanted to build a resort, a swimming pool, a fancy clubhouse, tennis courts. They wanted to turn our quiet street into some kind of suburban paradise, and the land they picked for all of it was mine. I read it again and again. My land, my trees, my backyard, gone, just like that, erased by ink and paper. I could almost hear Linda's voice in my head. That land is better used for the community. Community. That's what they always said. But what they really meant was control. I walked to the edge of my property that day. The sun was rising. Birds were singing. And all I could see was the small hill, the tall grass, the little oak tree I planted years ago. My land was simple, quiet, mine. But in the eyes of the HOA, it was gold, a perfect place to build their shiny new empire. They underestimated me. They thought I would sign the paper, smile politely, and give it all away. But they didn't know me. Not really. Because behind my quiet smile, I was already planning, already thinking, already imagining the look on Linda's face. When the trap closed on her perfect little plan, the thing about HOA people is they never believe they can lose. They sit in their meetings with coffee and cookies, gossiping about neighbors, and they think they're untouchable. But power makes people blind, and when people are blind, they walk straight into the trap you set for them. So I made a promise to myself. If they wanted my land, I would let them build on it. I would let them pour every brick, every dollar, every ounce of their pride into it. And then, when the time was right, I would take it all back in one move, a move they would never see coming for days. I played my role. I smiled at Linda when she waved. I nodded when neighbors asked if I would support the project. I acted calm, even friendly, but inside, I was laughing. Because I knew something they didn't. I still had the deed. And they never once bothered to check the resort, the pool, the fancy clubhouse, all of it would sit on my land, and legally, it would still belong to me. That was the beauty of their arrogance. They were so sure they had already won. They never looked for the trap waiting beneath their feet, and so I waited, I watched, I pretended to be powerless, while holding all the power in my hands. But let me ask you this. What would you have done if the HOA tried to steal your land? Would you fight them head on, or would you let them walk right into your trap and watch them fall? The neighborhood always looked perfect from the outside. Neatly trimmed hedges, clean sidewalks, shiny SUVs lined up. Like trophies in every driveway. If you drove past on a Sunday afternoon, you would think this was the safest, happiest place in the world. Children riding bikes with helmets too big for their heads. Sprinklers shooting rainbows across green lawns. Neighbors waving with smiles that never touched their eyes. But behind those smiles, behind the rows of perfect flowers and polished mailboxes, was the HOA, and the HOA was everywhere. They didn't just manage the neighborhood, they owned it, or at least, they thought they did. Every little thing had a rule. Mailbox must be painted in approved beige. Trash bins must be hidden behind fences by 6:01 p.m. sharp. Grass must be exactly 2 inches tall, not shorter, not longer. And heaven forbid if your Christmas lights stayed up one day after January 1st. People followed these rules like soldiers in an army. Not because they believed in them, but because breaking them meant fines. And those fines grew like weeds. $50 for a trash can, $100 for a mailbox, $250 for painting your shutters the wrong shade of brown. The HOA loved money almost as much as they loved power. And Linda, the president, was the queen of both. Linda carried her clipboard like it was a sword. She could slash your joy in half with one scribble of her pen. If you laughed too loud in your backyard, if your dog barked one too many times, she was there, writing you up with a smirk. I had seen her break people down, good people, neighbors who just wanted peace, one by one. They gave in, and one by one. Linda grew stronger, but she made one mistake. She believed everyone had a price. She believed every man in the neighborhood would bow his head and sign his land away if she offered him enough sweet words, and maybe most people would have. But not me. Because the land she wanted wasn't just dirt and grass. It was memory. It was history. That little patch of earth had been in my family for years. It wasn't much to look at, but it was ours. My father planted the oak tree there when I was a boy. I used to climb it, scrape my knees on its rough bark, and sit at the top watching the sun melt behind the rooftops. When my father passed away, I swore I'd never let that land go. Not for money, not for promises, not for anyone. So when Linda called her community meeting at the clubhouse, I already knew what it was about. She stood at the front with her hair sprayed stiff, her pearls shining under the cheap fluorescent lights. Around her were the board members, nodding like trained dogs, and on the projector behind them was a dream, the HOA dream, a giant pool with crystal water, a clubhouse with golden lights, tennis courts that gleamed under the sun. She called it the future of the community. The neighbors clapped. They gasped at the shiny pictures. They whispered about how their property values would rise, And then she said it, the words I had been waiting for. The land has already been chosen, and the owner has agreed to consider selling. Every head turned to me. I felt dozens of eyes burn into my skin. They expected me to smile, to nod, to play along. And I did. I raised my coffee cup, gave a little nod, and sat back in silence. Because the trap was already building itself, Linda thought she had me. The neighbors thought I was giving in. But what they didn't know was that every clap, every cheer, every fake smile was only helping me. The more excited they got, the more money they threw into the project, the more desperate they became to finish it. And desperation is the easiest weakness to exploit. Weeks passed, and the HOA worked like ants on sugar. They brought surveyors, architects, lawyers. They sent me papers with complicated words. They smiled when they handed me contracts. And I smiled back. I signed what I had to sign. I shook their hands. But every signature, every handshake was another thread in the web I was weaving. I kept my land deed safe, locked away where no one could touch it. The property line was clear, the papers were legal, and no matter what the HOA thought they had, the truth was still in my hands. I watched the land change. The oak tree was cut down, the grass was torn up, trucks came in, dumping gravel, concrete, steel. At night, I would sit by my window with the light off, watching the machines tear into the earth, and every time a bulldozer pushed deeper into my land, I felt two things at once: anger for what they had stolen, and joy, because I knew they were building their own downfall with every brick. The neighbors praised Linda. They brought her cookies, gifts, even thank you cards. She walked around the cul-de-sac like a queen on parade. And all the while, she had no idea her empire was built on sand, or worse, built on ground that didn't even belong to her. I kept my mouth shut. I let them celebrate. I let them believe they had won, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon of all. The resort started to take shape. You could see the outlines of the pool, the walls of the clubhouse, the signs that promised coming soon, paradise for our community. Children pointed at it with excitement. Parents whispered about summer parties. Linda stood at the edge of the site every morning with her clipboard, taking credit for everything. And me? I just stood back, sipping my coffee, smiling at the irony, because all of it, every stone, every drop of sweat, was still sitting on my land. I knew the day would come when the truth would strike like lightning. And when it did, it wouldn't just break the HOA, it would humiliate them, expose them, destroy them. But let me ask you something. If you saw your land being stolen piece by piece, would you scream and fight right away? Or would you stay quiet and let your enemies dig their own grave with their own hands? It started slowly, like a crack in a window that grows wider every day. The HOA wasn't patient anymore. The moment the foundation of the resort was poured, they wanted everything to move faster. Meetings every week, emails every night, phone calls that always began with fake politeness and ended with sharp little threats. At first, it was about community cooperation. They asked if I could sign one more paper. They asked if I could approve one more adjustment. They said it was all routine, nothing to worry about, but I knew what they were doing. They were trying to wear me down, trying to bury me in paperwork and pressure until I broke. Linda was always the one leading the charge. She would show up at my door with that smile, the kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. Her perfume was strong, like she wanted to choke the air around her, and her voice dripped with sugar-coated poison. "We're all so grateful you're being cooperative, but you know, delays are very expensive." Then she would tilt her head, lower her voice, and whisper the threat. It would be such a shame if the HOA had to take other measures. Other measures, that was her favorite phrase. It meant fines. It meant liens. It meant lawyers with briefcases full of paper and no mercy. Soon the letters came. White envelopes with bold black stamps, each one thicker than the last. Pages and pages of legal language, designed to scare. I read them carefully. every word. And then I laughed, because I knew something they didn't, no matter how many letters they sent. They couldn't erase my name from the deed. Still, they didn't stop. Neighbors began to change. Some avoided me. Others tried to convince me to do the right thing. One man knocked on my door and said his kids were already dreaming about swimming in the new pool. Another woman told me her husband believed property values would double once the resort opened. They weren't asking me anymore. They were demanding, pressuring, trying to corner me with guilt. But I stayed calm. I stayed quiet. I nodded, smiled, promised nothing. Because the more desperate they became, the stronger my position grew. Linda hated that. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted me angry. She wanted me scared. But instead, she saw me calm, sipping my coffee, unshaken, and that drove her mad. So she turned up the heat. One morning, I woke to find a bright orange notice nailed to my fence. It said I was in violation of multiple community codes. My grass was too long. My mailbox was the wrong shade. My fence had visible wear, all lies, all excuses, and at the bottom was the number that mattered most, $1,500 in fines. Due immediately, I tore it down and laughed. Because it was nothing but noise. I wasn't going to pay a dime, but they weren't done yet. A week later, another letter came. This one wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. They claimed I was in breach of agreement, that I had failed to comply with community expansion rules. They threatened lawsuits, they threatened foreclosure, they threatened to recover damages if I didn't sign their final contract. But here's the thing. Contracts only work if both sides are stupid enough to believe them, and I wasn't stupid. I had already copied every letter, every notice, every threat. I kept them in a folder, organized like trophies, because I knew one day those papers would burn the HOA down faster than fire ever could. Still, Linda kept coming. She stood at my fence, clipboard in hand, glaring at me like a hawk ready to dive. "You're only making this harder for yourself," she hissed. But I said nothing. I just looked at her, calm as stone, until she finally walked away. The truth is, I enjoyed watching them sweat. Every day the resort rose higher. Every day more money was poured into it. Every day Linda walked around pretending she had won. But the closer they got to finishing, the closer they came to losing it all. The neighbors kept whispering too. Some started to doubt. They asked Linda if everything was legal. They asked if the land was really secure, and I could see her smile twitch every time she said, "Of course." Because even she wasn't sure anymore. The weight of their lies was cracking the glass. I could see it, I could feel it, and soon it would all shatter. But before it did, the HOA made one last move. They sent a final notice, bold letters across the top. Failure to comply will result in immediate action. It was thick, heavy, full of legal threats. But at the very bottom, in small print, there was something interesting. They admitted the land was under review for title clarification. They admitted, for the first time, that the deed might not be theirs. It was a slip, a mistake, a crack in their armor, and I knew. The end was near. I leaned back in my chair, reading that letter over and over, smiling to myself, because no matter what they tried, no matter how many threats they made, the truth was unshakable. The land was mine, and the trap was almost ready to snap shut. But let me ask you this. If you were standing in my shoes, would you have stayed quiet and let them dig deeper? Or would you have already struck back and ended it all? The funny thing about power is, people stop looking where it matters most. The HOA thought they had crushed me with their letters, with their fines, with their threats. They believed they had me cornered, but in reality, they were the ones locked inside my trap. It began with silence. I gave them nothing to fight, no angry words, no loud protests, no public rebellion. Instead, I smiled. I nodded at their meetings. I agreed with the Year plans. And I played the role of the obedient homeowner. Linda loved it. Her smile grew wider every time I cooperated. She walked around the neighborhood like a queen, telling everyone the project was secured. Neighbors praised her, called her a visionary, even thanked her for handling me. And all the while, I just kept nodding, kept smiling, kept feeding the illusion, because sometimes silence is the sharpest knife of all. The resort rose higher each week. Steel beams pierced the sky. The pool was dug deep and wide. The clubhouse walls stretched upward, painted in fresh white. It was all shiny, new, expensive, and none of it belonged to them. I knew the truth. The deed was still mine, the land was still mine, and no signature, no letter, no fake smile could change that. But the more they built, the deeper they dug their own grave. I started playing my part more carefully. I showed up at HOA meetings. I clapped when they presented updates. I even offered suggestions. Little ideas that sounded helpful, but only made them spend more money. A fountain by the entrance, extra parking for guests, better landscaping around the clubhouse. And Linda, blinded by pride, approved it all. Every dollar she wasted, every brick she ordered, only made my victory sweeter. Sometimes I caught her watching me, her eyes sharp, suspicious, as if she could sense something was wrong. But then she would see me clap with the crowd, smile with the neighbors, and her doubt would fade. That was the beauty of it. I gave her just enough comfort to blind her again. But it wasn't just Linda who fell for the act. The board fell too. They paraded around the construction site in their suits, shaking hands with contractors. They called themselves community leaders. They even posed for photos in front of half-finished walls, holding shovels and smiling like politicians, all of it. One big performance built on stolen ground. I never stopped watching. Every night I walked the edge of the site. I watched the workers pour cement. I listened to the hammers, the drills, the saws. I stood under the dark sky, sipping my coffee, smiling to myself, because every nail they drove into the wood was another nail in the coffin of the HOA. Neighbors grew more excited too. Children ran around pointing at the pool. Parents talked about summer parties and barbecues. One man even told me, "This resort will be the heart of our neighborhood." I smiled at him, nodded, and inside I laughed because I knew the heart he was talking about would one day stop beating in front of all of them. The HOA grew careless as the months passed. They thought they had already won. They stopped questioning. They stopped checking. They never bothered to review the title again. Why would they? In their minds, the battle was over. But I knew. The real fight hadn't even started yet. I made sure to collect everything. Copies of the meeting notes, copies of the emails, copies of every letter they sent, every piece of paper that showed how confident they were, how blind they were. I stored it all in a locked drawer, because when the time came, those papers would speak louder than my voice ever could. The trap wasn't just about the deed, it was about timing. You don't spring a trap too early or too late. You wait until the prey is deep inside, so deep that when the jaws close, they can't escape. And the HOA, oh, they were deep. The resort was almost finished. The grand opening was weeks away. They had poured everything into it. Money, time, pride, reputation. Linda walked around like a celebrity, promising ribbon cuttings and celebrations. She told everyone this was her legacy, her crown jewel, her proof that the HOA wasn't just powerful, it was unstoppable. And that's when I knew the moment was close, because nothing is sweeter than watching someone fall from the highest peak. The higher they climb, the harder they hit the ground. The nigshid. Right before the completion inspection, I stood by the edge of the site. The lights glowed across the new pool. The clubhouse windows gleamed under the moon. It was beautiful, I'll admit, but it wasn't theirs. It never was, and tomorrow they would finally learn that truth. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled, because soon the world would see what happens when greed blinds you, when pride makes you careless, when an HOA forgets that one man's silence can be the loudest weapon of all. But let me ask you this. If you had the power to let your enemies build their own downfall, would you have the patience to wait? Or would you strike too soon and lose it all? The day finally came. The resort stood tall, polished, and ready. The pool sparkled under the sun. The clubhouse shined like a jewel in the middle of the neighborhood. The HOA had outdone themselves. Or at least, that's what they thought. Banners stretched across the gates. Grand opening. Welcome to the future of our community. Neighbors gathered in their best clothes, holding drinks, snapping photos. Children tugged at their parents' hands, already dreaming of diving into the water. It was a parade of pride. And every step, every smile, every cheer was built on my land. Linda was in her glory. She wore a bright red dress, pearls around her neck, and a smile so wide it almost cracked her face. She walked around shaking hands, accepting compliments, laughing like a queen at her coronation. Her clipboard was gone tonight. She didn't need it. This was her moment, the crown jewel of her rule as HOA president. I stood in the back, quiet, watching, smiling to myself, because tonight wasn't her coronation. It was her execution. Neighbors clapped as Linda took the microphone. She cleared her throat, soaking in the attention. "Welcome, everyone, to the future of our neighborhood," she said. The crowd cheered, flash. As from cameras lit her face, she raised her hands like a politician winning an election. "This resort will bring joy, community, and pride to us all, and none of this would be possible without cooperation from every single homeowner." And then her eyes found me. Her smile grew sharper. She wanted to remind everyone she had beaten me, that even I had bowed to her power. But she didn't know the truth yet. Not yet. As the ribbon stretched across the resort gates, Linda lifted her scissors. Neighbors counted down. 3, 2, 1. The ribbon snapped. Applause erupted. Music played. Children cheered. And then, silence. Because just as the crowd surged forward, a voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, county inspection." Everyone turned. A man in a gray suit stepped forward, holding a folder. He wasn't smiling. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Linda. She froze, her smile twitching at the edges. He walked past the banners, past the cameras, straight to the center of the crowd. "I'm here for final verification before this facility can open," he said. The crowd murmured. Linda forced a smile, waved her hand like it was nothing. "Of course, everything is in order," she said. But her voice wavered. The inspector opened his folder, flipped through the pages, and then he said the words that shattered the night. "There's a problem with the deed." The crowd gasped. Linda blinked, her hands trembling slightly. "What? What do you mean?" she asked. The inspector pulled out a document. "This land, this entire property, is not under HOA ownership." He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the faces. "It belongs to..." And then he looked at me. The world stopped. Every head turned, every eye locked onto me. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just stood there, calm, letting the silence grow heavier. The inspector continued. "The original deed holder never transferred ownership. His name is still on record." He lifted the page higher. "And that name is David Miller." The sound was like thunder, gasps, whispers, confusion. Linda's face drained of color. She shook her head, laughing nervously. That's impossible." But it wasn't, because I had made sure of it. The inspector frowned. "Without proper transfer, all construction is invalid. Technically, this entire resort has been built on private property without permission." The crowd erupted. Questions flew like arrows. Is this true? Linda, what's going on? Did you really build this on someone else's land? Linda tried to speak, but her words tangled into stutters. Her clipboard couldn't save her. Her fake smile couldn't protect her. The empire she had built with greed and arrogance was collapsing in front of her own neighbors. I stepped forward then, calm, slow, deliberate. All eyes followed me. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder I had kept for months. Every letter, every notice, every signature that proved their arrogance. I handed it to the inspector. My deed, my land, my proof. The inspector nodded, flipping through the pages. This confirms it, he said. The HOA has no legal right to this property. Everything here belongs to Mr. Miller. The silence that followed was delicious. Neighbors stared, mouths open, board members shuffled nervously, sweat dripping from their foreheads. And Linda, she looked at me like I had turned into a ghost. Her face twisted from shock to anger, then to fear, because in that moment she knew her perfect little plan had crumbled to dust. The crowd started to turn. Voices rose, angry, confused. You lied to us. You wasted our money. You ruined everything. The same neighbors who once cheered for her were now shouting at her, their smiles gone, their trust broken. And me? I just stood there, calm as ever, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. The trap had closed, the jaws had snapped shut, and the queen of the HOA was finally exposed. But let me ask you this. If you were standing in my place, watching the people, he who tried to steal from you crumble in front of everyone, would you forgive them, or would you make them suffer every last second of their downfall? The moment the inspector closed the folder, the air changed. The applause was gone. The cheers had died. What replaced them was anger, whispers, and the sharp edge of betrayal in every voice. Neighbors turned to Linda, their eyes once filled with respect, now filled with fire. The same people who clapped for her 10 minutes ago were now pointing fingers. You told us it was secure. You said this land belonged to the HOA. You made us pay for this. Linda's red dress seemed to shrink around her. The pearls at her neck suddenly looked like a noose. Her smile, that powerful, polished smile, was gone, replaced with trembling lips and darting eyes. I stood back, silent, letting the storm crash down on her, because I didn't need to say a word. The truth was louder than anything I could ever speak. One board member stepped forward, Mr. Thompson, a man who had fined me 3 times for improper hedge trimming. His face was red now, sweat dripping, his voice cracking. This can't be happening. We checked everything. We filed the permits. The inspector shook his head slowly. Permits are meaningless if the ownership isn't legal. And then his words cut deeper. Everything built here is subject to removal, and financial damages may apply. The crowd gasped. Neighbors covered their mouths. Children clutched their parents' hands, because in that single sentence, the dream resort turned into a nightmare money pit. Linda staggered. She tried to laugh, to smooth it over. This is a mistake. We'll fix it. Everything will be fine. But the neighbors weren't buying it. Not this time. A woman from the back shouted, "Fine? You took our dues. You took our savings. You promised us paradise and built it on a lie." Others joined in, their voices rising like thunder. "You scammed us. You lied. You should resign." Linda's eyes flickered desperately, searching for someone to defend her. But no one did, not even her loyal board members. They stood frozen, pale, realizing their power was slipping through their fingers. And me? I stepped forward slowly. The sound of my footsteps echoed louder than the shouts. When I reached the front, I turned to face the crowd. My voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "They tried to steal from me," I said. "They thought their rules, their power, their signatures could erase what I owned." I paused, letting my words sink in. But what they didn't count on was that one man with the truth could take everything back. The crowd quieted, all eyes on me now. For years I had been the outsider, the troublemaker, the man who didn't play by their rules. But tonight, I was the one who had beaten them. The inspector nodded at me. "Mr. Miller has every right to pursue legal action," he said. "Damages, compensation, even personal liability against the board." The silence that followed was heavy. Every neighbor stared at Linda, at the board, at the people who had led them into disaster. And Linda, her face crumbled, her shoulders sagged, her eyes glistened as she whispered, "This can't be happening." But it was happening. It was real. And it was only the beginning, because the neighbors weren't just angry. They were scared, scared of losing their money, scared of losing their homes if lawsuits started, scared of the very board that once claimed to protect them. One man shouted, "We should sue the board." Another added, "They stole from us too." The murmurs spread like wildfire, voices overlapping, demands growing louder, rage exploding into the night. Linda tried to shout over them, "This is under control. I will fix this." But no one listened anymore. Her crown was gone. Her kingdom was ashes. I watched her drown in her own arrogance, and I couldn't help but smile, because justice wasn't loud. Justice was slow, heavy, crushing. Justice was watching the powerful fall with the same weight they used to crush others. Neighbors started to push forward, not violently, but with fury in their eyes. Linda and her board backed away, clutching their papers like shields. But shields don't stop truth. Shields don't stop consequences. The inspector closed his folder firmly. "I'll be back with county orders," he said, and then he left, his footsteps calm while the world around him burned. The crowd didn't leave. They stayed, arguing, shouting, demanding, for the first time in years. The neighborhood wasn't afraid of the HOA. They were ready to tear it apart. And me? I slipped away quietly, because I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I had already won. But as I walked back toward my house, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't just about land anymore. It wasn't just about money or buildings or signatures. This was about power, and how fragile it really was. And so I wondered, now that the HOA had been broken in front of everyone, now that their lies were exposed and their empire cracked, should I stop here, or should I take them all the way down until nothing of their power remained? The neighborhood was never the same after that night. The banners still hung across the gates, but no one celebrated anymore. The pool sat empty, the clubhouse locked. The resort that was supposed to be a dream now looked like a monument to failure. Neighbors avoided walking past it. Children whispered about it like it was haunted. And Linda vanished from the streets, her red dress, her pearls, her clipboard, all gone, but her shadow still lingered. Her lies still clung to every mailbox, every fence, every cracked sidewalk in the cul-de-sac. The HOA tried to recover. Meetings were called, letters were sent, apologies scribbled in long paragraphs that sounded more desperate than sincere, but no one trusted them anymore. Every neighbor looked at them not as leaders, but as thieves, as liars, as clowns standing on a stage with no audience left to cheer. For weeks, the board begged me to negotiate. They sent letters. They knocked on my door. I even tried to smile again, though their smiles shook like broken glass. "Let's work this out," they said. "Let's find a solution," they pleaded. But I had no reason to help them. Why should I? They had tried to take everything from me, and now they were the ones drowning. One morning, I walked to the edge of the resort grounds. The grass was dying, the paint already fading under the sun. It looked like a ghost town, and it wasn't even open yet. Neighbors gathered too, curious, whispering. Someone shouted, "We should take legal action." Another added, "They should pay back every dollar we gave them." And the crowd roared in agreement. The board members stood stiff at the clubhouse steps. Linda finally appeared again. Her face pale, her eyes sunken, she looked like a queen without a crown. A puppet with cut strings, she tried to speak. "Please, we only wanted what was best for the community." But her words fell flat. The crowd booed. Laughter rose. And then silence fell again. When I stepped forward, I didn't rush, I didn't shout. I just walked slowly until I was standing face to face with her. For years she had towered over me, her rules, her fines, her endless power trips. But now she was small, fragile, shaking. I raised my voice just enough for everyone to hear. "You tried to take my land. You tried to erase me from this neighborhood, and you thought you could get away with it." I paused, looking at every face in the crowd. But now, everyone knows the truth. The neighbors erupted, applause, cheers, voices shouting my name like I was the one who had saved them. And maybe I had, or maybe I had just shown them what they were too afraid to see. Linda crumbled. She turned and ran inside the clubhouse. The board followed, their papers flying, their faces red with shame. The doors slammed shut, and the sound echoed like the end of an era. The HOA was done, broken from the inside, crushed from the outside. And it was all because of one thing they never expected: that I wouldn't bow down. Weeks passed. The county came back with orders. The resort was declared illegal. Fines piled up higher than the walls of the clubhouse. The HOA couldn't pay. Their accounts drained. Their power shattered. Eventually, the HOA dissolved completely. No more letters in the mailbox. No more fines on my door. No more red dress at the end of the street. Just peace. Real peace. The land? It was mine again. Every inch of it. I could have torn it all down. I could have sold it for profit. But instead, I left it standing, as a reminder, as a monument to their arrogance. And my victory. Now when I sit on my porch at night, I look across at the empty pool, the locked gates, the dark clubhouse, and I smile, because every brick, every beam, every single piece of that failed resort whispers the same truth. Don't ever mess with the wrong neighbor. But here's what I still wonder. If you were in my shoes, standing over the ruins of the people who tried to destroy you, would you leave their empire to rot like I did, or would you tear it down piece by piece until nothing remained?